Hello everyone and welcome to the latest installment of the Indie Initiative. I'm your host Mike Straw. In this episode I sit down with Sara Munk of Enlit Games, the studio behind the first-person puzzle game Temple of Starlight. Temple of Starlight, which is available now on Steam, sees players harness the power of color and light to navigate through over 30 different intricate puzzle levels, all to follow a non-linear story of an ancient civilization that was struck by devastating starlight disasters, and you guide the players throughout the crisis. Throughout this conversation, Sara and I talk about the inspiration behind Temple of Starlight, the team itself at Enlit Games, and how this game came to be with the entire team still being in school. So without any more delay, let's get into it. The Indie Initiative featuring Temple of Starlight. I'm pleased now to be joined by Sara Munk of Enlit Games. Sara, I know when we're recording this, it's late where you are, so first things first, thank you for taking the time to join me.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here and talk about our studio and our game.
So Temple of Starlight, we'll jump right into it. It's a game where it's not made to be a long one, but it's made to be a fun one. There's over 30 different levels, but what went into like the decisions about making it a short but sweet game instead of a long kind of, I don't want to use the term grinding, but a longer adventure for players?
I mean, a lot of it is in the design philosophy, of course, but also just in the practical aspect of the scope. Our studio is started, and we are still right now studying. So the game development has been a lot part of like study projects and stuff. So there's no scope for a long process. We really just wanted to make a short and good experience for the player.
Was it with what the game becomes and what you do? Because one of the things from the description of games or the game is you harness the power of the light and you color and color to navigate through the levels. What when you were planning the scope of this game and you guys were working on what you wanted this to be like gameplay wise, what type of difficulties came up with these ideas for designing these puzzles around utilizing light and color? Because it's not like it's something that's common in the history of puzzle games.
Yeah, so I mean, the first idea was like maybe we can teach people something, like learning to mix colors, because we had to learn that ourselves for our studies. And then it became a lot of like, okay, what can we actually do here? Because you can have so many different like shades and nuances of colors, and it gets very complicated very fast if you do all of them. So a very early design decision was, okay, we have our primary colors and our secondary colors, and that's it. So that it's always visually clear what you're working with. It's very hard to have a puzzle if you can't tell where red starts and ends and where green starts and ends next to it, right?
So did that when you guys decided, all right, we're going to stick with this colors, the color palette, I guess you could say, did that kind of make things easier for you guys? Once it might go without saying, when you narrow things down, it makes things easier, but how much did it change, or how much did it benefit the creation of Temple of Starlight?
It made it a lot simpler to work with. Like once you have the structure,
Yeah,
you can kind of go from there, especially with like puzzle designing. Like both a lot of options and very few options are both hard to design from, but it's becomes a different kind of challenge. Like once you have your rule set, then you can actually start working with it.
for the puzzle design itself, so the story is a nonlinear story. It's about an ancient civilization struck by a starlight disaster and then navigating through the crisis, the disaster. When it came to puzzle designs and just overall layout, how much did what you wanted to tell with the story of the game was factored into the puzzle design, or did the design of the puzzles kind of come first? How did that process come about?
So for a lot of it, the puzzles actually came first, like the idea of the light and using that. And then we kind of extrapolated from there. We're like, okay, the light, that's what we're working with. It has to be important. We're working with three primary colors, and that's where our characters come from. And their kind of characteristics are based on like things that people typically associate with the colors. Like our character of red is very emotional, and blue is more cold and calculated, and green is sort of the in between, trying to make peace with them.
The team at Enlit Studios, we'll move away from the game for a minute. The team at Enlit Studios, obviously, it's a small independent studio. How did this group come together? How did you guys decide we need to work together to make a game?
Yeah, so we're all in the same study, and so throughout the semesters, you kind of get to know more people, and all five of us kind of had this passion of like, okay, how can we make games? Like when you get given a random project at your studies, it was like, okay, can we turn this assignment that we've gotten into making a game? And that's kind of where it all started. And once we kind of got going on for now Temple of Starlight as our first game that we released here, we were like, okay, we actually really like this and we would like to share it. Where do we go from here? What do we
Yeah.
do? And that's where the company idea kind of starts.
How obviously you guys you're in schooling, you're learning as you go. No when everybody it's their first attempt at some point. Getting a first attempt, usually people don't put their first attempt out for the world. But Temple of Starlight launches, it's received positive feedback, positive reviews on Steam. To see that kind of stuff and see how the game came together, was that surprising at all, knowing how new everybody is to this industry?
It was almost a surreal experience at the point of like launching, because all the way up until then we were like, okay, what's our goal actually? And for the most part, we were just like, okay, if we can just like actually go through the process and release the game, like that was our main goal. And they were like,
Yeah.
okay, and hopefully people will like it, right? So like clicking the news and being like, well, people like more people than just our friends are actually playing the game and enjoying the game. It's it's hard to imagine when you go in.
Yeah, when you go in and then you're like, oh yeah, that's not just a friend. When it gets bigger, something gets bigger than a friends and family
Mm.
type of thing. Like you mentioned, surreal is a great way to put it. Did it kind of lend validity and make you guys realize you can do this, you can make this, you can make Inlet games, something to grow in the future, not just with Temple of Starlight, but even future projects down the line?
Absolutely. I mean, you're like, okay, we try to make games a bit during our study time, but it's always the question of, okay, but can you actually sustain any sort of game making once you're done with your studies and you start working full time? So it's very like encouraging in a way of, even if it's just on the side of like, oh, we can actually put stuff out there and
Yeah.
people will play it, right?
How when the game you guys push the game out, it starts to get played. Obviously, there's feedback. There's things that come up that you didn't notice before it pushed out. How did you guys react to seeing feedback from people, whether it is friends and family or uh, regular players on online? How did that work within the company? Because every studio, big or small, has different ways of handling feedback. But how do you guys, as a small 5-team group, handle that type of feedback from people?
I mean, it's a bit of a mix. We don't have as rigid of a structure as you might imagine. Like you, a lot of the
Yeah,
times when you see like credits for bigger games, there'll be like one person responsible for each minor thing or detail.
yeah.
That's of course not what it works like here. It's like, sure, one guy does a lot of the more of the programming and one does more of the sound. But it's a lot of like internal communication, because we are just like a small friend group, right? So it's like, oh, someone said this. Can someone answer? Can someone fix this? Like pointing
Well,
out to the people.
you bring up the friend group thing. Obviously, when you're working on something like this that you're all passionate about, you all like, you're not going to agree on everything. But does working with friends make it? Has it made it easier to kind of make decisions and how the game was built, or did that cause any sort of extra conflict knowing that you guys were friends? or our
Uh,
friends?
well, for it's interesting because there's like two different parts we feel like of the process. Like making the game, we've done that before. Like we became friends through studies making things like the games. So the workflow is kind of uh smoothed out, and we know like, oh, you enjoy making this, so you should, look at that. Uh, what's been more of like a grind has been going from, oh, we make a game, to, oh, we want to be a company and release the game, because suddenly there's a bunch of like managing stuff that needs to get done, and
Yeah,
who
things you
actually
don't
wants
think
to do
about.
that,
Yeah.
and who should take over, and like more serious business talks. And for that, it gets a bit harder of like, okay, this needs to be done, and I know you don't enjoy it, but we need you to do this, and so on.
Did that cause, when you guys decided you wanted to get the game out, did that cause any issues, or was it just, you know what, we want to get this game out, so we just do what we need to do type of thing? Or yeah, did it cause any kind of friction at all?
Um, we had a little bit about like, okay, who should be responsible for like email communication and outside, and like the financial side, and making sure that banking and bookkeeping and registration and all the legal stuff is taken care of. Because we're passionate about making games,
Yeah, not
not
so
so
passionate.
much running a business necessarily.
Yeah, and you're not the only one to say that. I feel like every small studio, every small group who makes a game has that same response. It's a case of, we love the game, we believe in everything. All the other stuff I don't want to deal with. No, just let me make and release the game. With the game out, is this something with Temple of Starlight that you are, the team is still looking at adding to, or now that it's out, is it a case of, all right, well, what's next?
We have had talks internally if we, at some point in the future, want to maybe add more levels or some kind of expansion in that sense. But for the most part, we're done and moving on. And that's just from a practical perspective.
Yeah.
That we're about to finish our studies, so we had to, next semester we have to make new projects. How can we make that a new game?
Yeah.
Um,
With Temple of Starlight specifically, how did, and we'll go back to, I know we got kind of off track with the game, now we're back on it. How did like the decisions of what you wanted the game to be come about? Was it just something that clicked? Was one of you, is one of you more into the art style that it just made sense, or how did that decision of what it became came about?
I mean, we started out with like, okay, we want to make a game. What ideas do we have? For study purposes, we need something that we can test. So we were like, okay, can we maybe teach something? Because then that makes us kind of squeeze in, oh, we're making a game, but it's for learning.
Yeah.
Uh, so we just kind of went through, we're like, okay, well, what have we learned in our studies? And the color theory was one of the things. We were like, okay, that's a nice visual. And then things kind of go from there. We definitely have like one or two people who are more into the artsy sort of side of it, which is relevant when working with colors.
Oh, 100%. I assume so. Yeah, I'm not the most art inclined person when it comes to visuals. I don't know what looks good. I just am here. I know what looks good to me. I don't know what looks good to a broader market. How happy overall would you say you guys are, and you personally, with what the game ultimately became?
I'm, I at least personally am very happy. Like we had some talks with the like, okay, we've set sort of a deadline because we needed to get done before this semester started. So we were like,
Yeah.
okay, what do we really want in there? And it really was a lot of priorities of like, okay, do we need to, like, if we don't get this done, do we still put it out? Because our goal wasn't to like put it out and make a lot of money, right? We wanted to make something that we were proud of and happy with. So we did have some key points of like, okay, we want all the levels to be fully decorated because we updated that along the way, and we were like, no, it needs this. It needs to look nice and feel nice because that's what it's important to us for this release, right?
Yeah. So you get the game out and everything. You decided, we want to put this out. Everything goes well. It's out. How did you guys celebrate? Did you have a big party? Did you just something quiet. Like obviously it's a major milestone. Not many people who even set out to do it can actually publish and release a game. You all did it while still studying. How did you guys celebrate?
With a party, kinda. Cause we'd chosen the date based on like, oh, what's the best time to release from a business perspective. But half of the studio had their exams the morning of, and half of them had it the day after. Uh, so it was a more scaled down party, but with like nice food and champagne and us all cheering as one person pressed the release button on Steam, and then
That's
had to wait 30 seconds and release my game.
yeah, that's to me that makes it even better knowing the fact that oh well we have to do the school thing. Yeah. How much for you? How much did seeing this come out really kind of make you feel that this is something you want to continue to go down?
I mean, there's always the feeling of like, okay, like making games is cool. It would be amazing if I could do it in the future. And this is kind of like the piece of like, no, you can do it. Like it is possible. You don't need to be a giant studio and all of this to actually make something creative that you enjoy, even if it's on the side.
What advice, this actually ties into this, what advice, there's a lot of people who are on the fence of making a game, whether they're in school, whether they've been out of school and just interested for 10, 15 years or whatever, no matter the age. What advice would you give to somebody who's nervous about jumping in and trying this, whether it's a single solo dev or a small group like you guys at Inlet?
I mean, a lot of games are put out, but that doesn't mean that you can't also put something out, even if it's not to make money or to become the biggest hit or whatever. The personal satisfaction also of doing something creative that you're passionate about, even if it's just your friends enjoy it, that's extremely satisfying to see it works and people like it, no matter the degree of how many. And also just the fact that the feeling of like accomplishment of making it, if it's something that you're passionate about.
Sara, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me for Temple of Starlight from Enlit. You can find Temple of Starlight now on Steam for a very nice price of $5. There's a demo, but also to help support Enlit and what you guys are doing, we here at Insider Gaming, we're going to be purchasing a number of copies and we're going to be giving them away to our viewers to support you guys as well. So it's something like this is just doing the indie initiative is something that I am very passionate about because it makes just to see where the industry is going and see people still passionate about it. Just it warms my heart, and just to know the passion that you guys have, it's really nice to see.
Thank you so much for doing this and bringing people in to talk about the games that people don't necessarily see everywhere.
Thank you so much.